strap right in. We're going to jump straight into the Bitcoin section in part one, and we're going to start right now. So first thing, this week in Bitcoin, El Salvador confirmed. We covered this in many episodes in the past, but they stacked another 5 Bitcoin in 24 hours last week. And this was important because they had to do a bit of a capitulation to the economic hitmen at the International Monetary Fund. Sadly, unfortunately, Bukele, in the limitations of politics, has not accumulated enough Bitcoin to protect itself from the International Monetary Fund. So $3.5 billion needed to be structured. And in the meantime, he's building his strategic reserve so he can come back and live to fight another day. Some of those reserves have been built using the money from the International Monetary Fund, is my guess. But the total strategic Bitcoin reserves holdings of El Salvador, because El Salvador publishes their wallet address, and the people and the civilians of El Salvador can hold their government 100% accountable, knowing that they are building them and not using them and not spending them and not paying down debt with Bitcoin until they can significantly dwarf the debt and restructure the economy to one of sovereignty, where they don't have to make this false choice between China's Belt and Road Initiative and the economic hitmen at the International Monetary Fund, that if you don't bend the knee, you end up with an assassination, or you end up with regime change, or you end up with a civil war, as was the case and is now becoming very apparent. It was a brilliant week, actually. We'll get to more of it in the geopolitical section. But many of the things that people have been watching my video and saying, Simon, you're a tinfoil hatter, you're a conspiracy theorist. Turns out they're all true. And the CIA and all the deep state has all been exposed for the institutions like US aid. And we're going to be going deep into all of that. So these crazy things, Simon, you can't tell me that the deep state in the US is responsible and funds and weaponizes these groups. And you can't tell me that these are Mossad operations. Well, it turns out they are. And now you can watch it and read it and see it in real time. But don't worry, if you watch Bitcoin Hard Talk, you find out about it before everyone else so that you're ahead of the trend and you know the crimes and atrocities of the fiat currency proof of weapons network that was built in order to fund all of this war, death, and destruction. And you get to boycott it because every dollar, every euro, every yen, every pound that is saved in Bitcoin is a peaceful resistance and protest against the fiat currency proof of weapons network that is destroying society and killing humanity and funding all of these covert regime change and oppression around the world. But we get to fight back with the resistance. So how many Bitcoin does El Salvador now have to fight back? Live to fight another day, 6,055.18 Bitcoin. And they added, I think they, what did they add? Over the last 7 days, they added 8 Bitcoin. So slowly but surely, El Salvador is still ahead of the trend. The Kingdom of Bhutan has got a lot more relative to the population per capita. But the total added in the last 30 days since they had to bend the knee to the International Monetary Fund is 50.42 Bitcoin. So they are still building their Bitcoin strategic reserves. But as we said, the International Monetary Fund did their political interference in order to take the debt that is so detrimental to so many countries. $3.5 billion. And Bukele had to basically start accepting the negotiation that happened with Marco Rubio, the new, is it Secretary of State? I think it's, not Secretary of State. I'll get the title later anyway. Anyway, the guy that used to do what Anthony Blinken does, important for all of the international affairs. Thank God we haven't got Anthony Blinken. He needs to go to prison. He needs to go to The Hague. And he was doing the bidding for Genocide Joe and Holocaust Harris that led to the death and destruction 2.3 million Palestinians there were before Genocide Joe, and Trump said there's only 1.7 million left. That's 600,000. While the media covered up the whole thing in order to make you think that what you were seeing in front of your eyes was you being crazy. No, it wasn't. You were seeing exactly what Israel was doing, and America was covering up, and so was Britain. And we all know now that USA has been funding all of the media in order to lie to you, to justify war, and play with your emotions and cause violence by feeding you a one-sided narrative that justifies the atrocities for the profits of the military-industrial complex. Well, anyway, we now know and understand what these open borders and immigration policy is about. It is about negotiations with tariffs by sending people back in these mass deportations, which was a deliberate engineered strategy in the first place. And now El Salvador, who has built out these rehabilitation types of operations after they had to suffer with the M16 gangster invasion as a result of the operations that the CIA inflicted in creating civil war, civil unrest in El Salvador that led to these open border trade routes between America and El Salvador. They were put into prison, and El Salvador's building out a rehabilitation program to try and bring back those people into peaceful Bitcoin society. And so because if they can take less IMF debt and they can rebuild their economy with Bitcoin, maybe these gangsters that were put in the desperate situation can go through El Salvador's prison, they can go through rehabilitation, and they can build Bitcoin strategic reserves and actually have a future for themselves and their loved ones based upon an economy that is actually reducing criminality by focusing on sovereignty and a shared vision of building a country based upon Bitcoin. We shall see. But anyway, as part of the IMF structure, El Salvador and President Bukele announced this week that they will be taking global prisoners into their prison if America wants to export them. I haven't done the due diligence on the business model yet, but you can bet that there is a business model behind it concerning rehabilitation. We shall see. I'll dig a little bit deeper for future episodes. But Marco Rubio, went and negotiated that deal for the Trump administration with the capital of Bitcoin, El Salvador. Now, another major flip-flopper, and very geopolitically strategic country in the world, and in fact, the country with the largest population in the world, India, capitulated again into Bitcoin. I made many, I invested early on in a company called UnoCoin that was bringing Bitcoin across India, and the journey that they've had to go through with regulations on, regulations off, the proof of weapons network of the Indian rupee, saying, no, you can't do it. Yes, you can do it. But they're back and they are allowing Indians all around the world to buy Bitcoin. And guess what? They've got the largest supplies or the largest, percentage of the nation's savings in cash and gold. And then through the Indian demonetization, remember that one, the Indians had to queue outside the proof of weapons network, put their bags of cash and convert it into fiat currency, dirty digital currency, in order to make sure that they were converting their sovereign savings into a digital reserve that can be levered up in the proof of weapons network in order to stimulate the economy. And many people actually had sacks of money. The crimes meant that they lost their money. They had to be, violence was on the rise during that time. And it increased the demand for Bitcoin and gold at the time. But India has now capitulated again. And as these gold reserves, as these cash reserves that can be weaponized by the proof of weapons network goes to the younger generation, the older generation that still thinks gold is everything, will eventually pass those assets on to the next generation, and they will be selling a chunk of their gold and buying Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is solving more problems for future generations that want to live in this global world where you can go anywhere, and you can take your wealth with you, and you can transport it anywhere, unlike gold, which is seized at the border, or cash, which is forced into the digital version through demonetization as they wipe out the smaller denominations of notes as a theft and confiscation of wealth. Well, India has capitulated again. And India, I think for the final time, and this happens so many times for those of you that have been following Bitcoin Hard Talk throughout the years, they are going to review their stance on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And this is in light of global policy changes. So the game theory is playing out. The country that is last to adopt Bitcoin will be the one that loses the geopolitically strategic advantage to those that adopt it first. And while America is going through its process over the next 100 days that we'll be covering shortly, every country gets to front run, move faster, and build their Bitcoin strategic reserves. And I hope you took advantage of the opportunity to build some of your own personal Bitcoin strategic reserves as the price went down below $0.1 million Bitcoin. And so you get to buy Bitcoin at below $0.1 million when your grandparent, your grandchildren, and your children will ask you, what were you doing when the entire monetary system was flipped as a result of this bottom-up movement called Bitcoin, where countries had to capitulate, companies had to capitulate, individuals had to capitulate, BlackRock had to capitulate, the Federal Reserve had to capitulate in his speech last week when Jerome Powell said banks should own Bitcoin because they need to capitulate because unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, by design, anybody can use Bitcoin. Even the gangsters of the proof of weapons network can use it. But India now capitulated and needs to move fast in order to ensure that they can protect their position as one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Why? Because America gave them a gift when they sanctioned Russia, and Russia said, we'll send you some cheap oil, and then you can take a clip and send it over to Europe, and the world can be fooled into thinking that these sanctions are actually harming our economy when Russia actually strengthened its economy and created this fast growth economy in India that was subsidized by that little clip. And recognize that we're moving to a world of de-dollarization based upon the weaponization of the dollar, because you can't weaponize the dollar and be the world reserve currency. More about that in the macro section. But, you know, Bitcoin doesn't need India. Bitcoin doesn't need America. Bitcoin doesn't need China. They need Bitcoin. America needs Bitcoin. India needs Bitcoin. China needs Bitcoin. Panama needs Bitcoin. Gaza needs Bitcoin. And Greenland needs Bitcoin. We'll be covering more and more about that anyway. Bitcoin does not need any country. As we said, it is a geopolitically strategic network that can't be taken down by any one country because proof of work has reached a stage where it cannot be interfered. And it is far, far, far too expensive and far, far, far too much power behind it so that we can have this beautiful game theoretical experiment where countries can be driven to peace by saying it's much, much better that Russia, India, America, we all trade with each other because the dollar can no longer be weaponized and Bitcoin can be used in order for us to trade through these different routes. And if you don't want to play, we can back our currency by Bitcoin at BRICS. And America, you can build your geopolitical strategic reserves. And the one country that does it last will be the one that will be punished the furthest. They will be the country known as the Peter Schiff of Bitcoin. A famous meme coin should be created. Oh, I'm not going to say that. Someone will create it as we go. Nothing to do with me. I promise you. Public announcement. I will not create a meme coin. And if anyone does, they are trying to scam you and steal your money. Do not participate. It is bad for your health. Bitcoin is good for your health. Peacefully resist. Please do not get confused by these fake fiat currency money printing in a new form called meme coins and pre-mined coins and ledgers that are servicing banks and various other things. Anyway, as I said, largest population in the world with the largest rate of savings in gold that will be passing on those gold reserves to their next generations. And Bitcoin will most likely be one of the assets as Bitcoin gobbles up the market cap of gold. Now, the market cap of gold is hitting new all-time highs at the moment because the proof of weapons network is accumulating at a faster and faster rate. While countries are building their Bitcoin strategic reserves, the fiat currency proof of weapons network is building their gold reserves. If Bitcoin grows at a faster rate than gold, we can demonetize the proof of weapons network and create a global network of sovereign countries that can restructure away their interference from those central banks that came from the Bank for International Settlements, the International Monetary Fund, the Bank of England, and the Federal Reserve that funds all the criminality and deep state that is causing so much wealth inequality within America that's being exported globally. And Bitcoin is the mechanism by which people can beat the scam of the debt-based fiat currency Ponzi scheme that has been legitimized by government by slapping law on top of it and saying this, the Federal Reserve, is acting in the best interest of America. Yeah, just like the Bank of England was when it drove us into all this wartime funded, bankrupted the UK government, drove us into a mercantile, expansive colonial empire that bankrupted the empire just as they moved it and transitioned as a globalist over to the Federal Reserve, just as this global network and these globalists are transitioning over to BRICS because they are not America first. They wanted to take you away from the Constitution, turn you into a socialist country, and if they can, they'll replace your socialism with a central bank digital currency and take you closer and closer to the ideology that was funded by the proof of weapons network after the Federal Reserve was created, the Bolshevik communist revolution, where they replaced Russia with the Soviet Union and expanded communism and created this fake Cold War, or this real Cold War, on an ideology where the globalists and the proof of weapons network was funding both sides with the Federal Reserve and this bottom-up Soviet Union that eventually fell because it's such a failed ideology. But they have their tools, and it's called central bank digital currencies. And your country has your tool, and it's called Bitcoin. And you can opt out no matter what happens and buy your own Bitcoin and say, you countries do as you choose. I need to build my strategic reserves so that I can get myself into a position of safety, a financial position where I can take my wealth wherever I need to go. And I can actually have an impact because I'm able to use that type of freedom that Bitcoin has given so many over the last 14 years that I've been advocating since $3 for people to buy some Bitcoin every month. And so many people have escaped the oppression as a result of it. What else have we got? Right. Now, interesting one. There was the public report came from, so Tether does this attestation, and Tether is essentially full reserve on a blockchain, and they publish through attestations their reserves, which are mainly US treasuries. So the UST stablecoin gives people the ability to send a digital dollar all around the world. And it also gives governments a tool in case they want to fight back against the banking cartel and the Federal Reserve and their central banking network by essentially weaponizing full reserve in order to take out fractional reserve. And so stablecoin regulation is next on the agenda for the US. But why do they have a strategic importance under the Trump administration to explore it? Well, let's just take a little bit deeper into what we actually saw. So Tether released their profits from the 31st of December 2024 for the entire year. The group's consolidated accounts showed that total assets of $157.6 billion. So there is assets within the group, their own assets, plus the assets and the liabilities that they owe to customers through the total amount of tethers that have been issued, of $157 billion approximately. That makes them approximately the 18th largest lender and purchaser of US treasuries, relative to all the other sources of income in an environment where like the Bank of Japan is increasing rates, which is leading to selling, and less, which is the largest foreign lender and purchaser of treasuries, but those are decreasing for geopolitical reasons and isolationist reasons and nationalist reasons that we'll be covering in the macro and geopolitical section. But the Tether Transparency Report for 2024 was published, and it showed also a total liabilities of $137.6 billion. That means at the time of the end of the year, there were 137.6 billion tethers in issuance that they owed to customers that were backed by the $157 billion of assets, which include their own reserves plus the reserves that back Tether. So the tethers in circulation is approximately 153 billion. So there was $7 billion of additional reserves on top of the amount that is backing the tether as per the BDO attestation. Now, this did not include the company's investments, and they had proprietary investments on their own balance sheet. They're now investing in renewable energy in order to power Bitcoin mining. I'm sure they're making many investments in El Salvador to repurpose geothermal energy from volcanoes in order to allow El Salvador to get more sovereignty. And Bitcoin mining and artificial intelligence, Bitcoin mining operations are now being hedged with artificial intelligence. And thanks to DeepSeek that we covered last week, we now know that the amount of computational power has changed the game as the companies are adjusting to that. Even investing in telecommunications. They did an investment in Rumble in order to, have less censorship as a competitor to YouTube. Make sure you follow me on Rumble. I'm about to build my network. That's my hedge in case YouTube takes me out because of all the stuff they don't like. Oh, please do me a favor. I'm going to get back to Tether in a second. I'm trying to get to 100,000 subscribers. Since I covered some of the more controversial geopolitical content, I've gone from being promoted by YouTube to being censored by YouTube. So I 100% rely upon you. And if I can get to over 100,000 subscribers, and I had fast growth, but I'm stuck at this 91,000. I think I'm about 9,000 subscribers away. If you hit the subscribe button, hit the bell symbol, hit all, and if we can get another 9,000 subscribers, I can get a blue tick, and hopefully that will reduce the amount of censorship. We can get that a review. They can see that actually, now that US aid has been published, the things that they used to think were conspiracy theories are actually true information. And we can make sure that more and more people get this message so we can protect more people in a world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs. I need you to get there. Help me get to 100,000 subscribers. Hit that subscribe button. If everybody that watches this video is subscribed, I'd be there today. So please do that for me, and I'll keep making sure that I deliver good content for you if you're enjoying it. Okay, back to Tether. So they had all these different types of investments that are not included in that as well, or not included as part of their reserves. And Tether pulled in a net profit of $13 billion. $13 billion for 2024, which is essentially giving you a full reserve digital asset and digital dollar that anyone can send around the world. They then invest it in treasuries. The government pays an interest rate because they're fueling the inflation of the proof of weapons network. People get to protect themselves by buying Bitcoin with it. And Tether takes some of that takes some of that money that the US government is paying in order to fuel up the proof of weapons network, and they boycott it by buying Bitcoin. The Bitcoin is outperforming the proof of weapons network, and they are essentially demonetizing the banking system using stablecoins as well. This could create some resistance against a central bank digital currency. I'm not saying it will be great. The technocrats will control it. Facebook will try it. X will try it. PayPal created their own. I'm sure we're going to have just as oppressive environment from stablecoins. However, it does reduce the debt dependency of the fiat currency proof of weapons network and give the actual structure that's needed in case the government ever wanted to end the Fed, and you don't need to go down with the Fed as well. So this is going to be a huge point of contention, and they'll try and get a CBDC, but the more stable coin adoption that happens in the country, the fiat currency proof of weapons network can resist against the central bank. And obviously you're opting out with Bitcoin, but you still need some fiat currency to cover your everyday expenses. If you're going to be joining me later this year in the Bitcoin Wealth Builder program, I'll tell you all about exactly how I manage that, how that transition is going, and how you can be a part of it in order to transition peacefully to a world of Bitcoin AI and protect yourself from the AI and CBDCs as well, and build the network that can make them more decentralized as well. Anyway, right. So $13 billion, how big is that? Look, we're kind of used to, we're getting like desensitized towards the number billion now because the fiat currency just prints these numbers and they just fly them out around the world and they just send them to fund wars. And media manipulates us into thinking that this is about protecting democracy when really it's about giving you inflation, and then the corrupt money goes into the hands of the military industrial complex to make you poorer while their profits get bigger, perpetuating wealth inequality. And then they use that money to bribe the political class. They get richer, and politics is used to not serve the people, is to serve the political class and also prop up corruption. And then that money is then used to create more death and destruction around the world. The IMF forces these loans from the economic hitmen, and then all of these countries suffer greater inflation, and we just overthrow their governments, replace democracies with dictators, and pretend to be the good people and gaslight anyone that fights against it. But Bitcoin gave us that peaceful resistance. Anyway, who are the shareholders of the Fed and the beneficiaries of that? Of course, it's the banks. And so the banks that are the shareholders of this private company, how profitable are they? Well, and through this demonetization of fractional reserves through stable coins and through utilizing Bitcoin to outperform the proof of weapons network over the long term, every 4-year cycle, now stable coins are more profitable than the largest banks in the world. I looked it up. In 2024, Citigroup had a $12.7 billion profit. Tether's more profitable than Citibank, a primary shareholder in the Federal Reserve that gets to utilize money printing and credit creation in order to indebt the world. They get a subsidy to create that debt. They get free money to create that debt, and they're less profitable than the largest stablecoin in the world. This stuff's only just getting started. This is so interesting. What about Danske Bank? I think that's a Danish one. Maybe I'm wrong there. $3.5 billion. So this is minuscule compared to Tether. Banco Santander of Spain, $2 billion net profit in 2024. So a stable coin issuer is making more net profits than many of the largest banks in the world. That is an interesting scenario. Now, does that mean that the stable coins are not also contributing to the atrocities? No, we avoid them, and that's where Bitcoin comes in. But we still need our fiat currency rails, and they can also be built upon, just as was announced last week when Tether announced that they're building Tether on top of the Bitcoin Lightning Network as well, which then contributes to those that want to receive yield by firing up these channels in the Lightning Network. All very interesting times. Right. What else did we get in the Bitcoin side? Let's get into the Trump. He signed another executive order, and that was to create a sovereign wealth fund. Now, the sovereign wealth fund is going to be independent of the Bitcoin strategic reserve strategy. But Cynthia Lummis, who is in charge of this Bitcoin strategic reserve bill, said that this could be, or hinted at, that this could be a mechanism. And it makes sense, right? You could use the strategic stockpile to take all of the confiscated crypto, hand that over to Treasury, and then you could combine, through some clever financial engineering, all of these stockpiles, put them into a sovereign wealth fund, and maybe you get Saudi Arabia to invest in that sovereign wealth fund. That then starts being backed by some of the strategic relationship between Saudi and UAE. And you can have as long if it's not using taxpayer money, which would be like a forced investment. Imagine they're printing money, creating inflation, and then forcing you, rather than buying Bitcoin, in order to invest into a strategic wealth fund. But remember, a wealth fund historically has always been a profitable nation, a nation running a surplus, a nation that's not indebted, that has a proof of weapons network, a nation like Saudi that uses their oil for the people and then is able to have a sovereign wealth fund in order to make strategic investments. So how do you do that at the same time as massive, massive deficits, massive, massive debts, and a world reserve currency? We'll cover a bit more about that in the macro section. But the point being is that you can see the structure being formed of how to implement this Bitcoin strategic reserves and fight against the Federal Reserve, so that as we go through this transition, there is more options outside of the fiat currency, proof of weapons, debt-based Ponzi scheme. So in order to achieve that, there needs to be a regulatory environment. So we had a little bit of this pro-crypto, because while El Salvador's trying to be Bitcoin capital of the world, America is trying to be crypto capital of the world. And Trump has loaded up, as we said. He's got his meme coin collection. He's got his company that is a public company, True Social, that's doing true finance. He's got his stable coins. He's got his World Liberty Financial, a governance token. He's got his DeFi platform using Ethereum. He's got his meme coin for himself, his meme coin for his wife, which, by the way, I warned you against. It's now crashed 60%. You can thank me later. And now DJT, his public company, is looking to do a MicroStrategy strategy. Oh, MicroStrategy is now known as just simply strategy with a Bitcoin logo. And so now I can, the strategy that DJT is using is going to be also applying to be an issuer of Bitcoin ETF. So I've learned a lot about Trump. Trump is in it for the profits, and he gets all of his interests aligned and then negotiates deals in order to service his profits. Now I understand what I think, and I'm able to analyze where the macro side and geopolitical side goes. And I'll be going through my thoughts on the whole, America deciding that it's going to own Gaza. I'll be going through that in the geopolitical section in part 3. But so he is lining up a pro-crypto environment. So the SEC, under the Biden administration, which was attacking the industry and servicing BlackRock and the Fed under Gary Gensler and his corrupt network, and meeting with SBF in order to create that democratic USAID, bribery network that was being used in order to, get political contributions away from the military-industrial complex in Ukraine, and led to the loss of so many people's money. And Gary Gensler would meet SBF, the only person in crypto would meet. We've now got a new crypto task force. And a website was launched, it basically said the aim of this is to clarify crypto getting sued from the SEC because of the Gary Gensler, Biden administration hostility to hand the, as much of the industry over to the banks and BlackRock. And so now brokers are going to be able to work, hopefully, with this industry. They capitulated, as we said. the game theory at play. Now, interestingly, the SEC decided that it needed to do an overhaul. So it reduced its crypto enforcement efforts by reassigning over 50 lawyers that were working on suing crypto companies. And the cases, 50 of them have now moved to another department, and they are not working on those cryptocurrency enforcement cases. So they're shrinking the size of that team. We'll see what impact that has. At the same time, one of the forces for the Federal Reserve that is weaponized in order to take out any banks. Remember, the FDIC had decided to just take out the crypto-friendly banks when the Fed decided to use inflation as transitory, hiked rates, and took out, broke the U.S. banking system, got one of their agents, Peter Thiel, to crash Silicon Valley Bank, told everyone to withdraw on Spaces, and then got one of their other agents, Bill Ackman, in order to lobby the world to say, I'll buy up the banks for free. We'll put together a Silicon Valley syndicate as long as the FDIC underwrites the whole system so we can socialize the losses like 2008, and Bill Ackman can keep all of the profits, another agent at the Fed. And then the FDIC decided to wipe out all of the crypto-friendly banks despite the fact that they were solvent, profitable, and doing good business. And so they took out Silicon Valley Bank, Signature, Silvergate, and that has all been swept under the bus. Hopefully that comes out as well, with all this US aid corruption that's coming out. But now the FDIC is turning over a new leaf, and it plans to revise its crypto guidelines and allow banks to engage in crypto activities. Now, remember, it's one thing owning Bitcoin in self-custody, which is what everyone should be learning how to do. It's another thing owning it through an ETF where the Bitcoin is held in custody to back those shares. But it is a crazy idea to store your Bitcoin with a bank when they can engage in fractional reserve banking. And then you can bet your bottom dollar, if that bank goes bust and they do an FDIC takeover through a deregulation environment, they're not going to take away their fractional reserve banks. That's the stablecoin model. So they're going to have fractional reserve bank, deregulation environment. They're going to be able to hold your Bitcoin. And so if they make dodgy loans, they can use their Bitcoin and they will dollarize your claim if there's an FDIC takeover and they go into Chapter 11 like Lehman Brothers did. And they can mark your Bitcoin to market and benefit from the price increase in Bitcoin, just like FTX did, just like Celsius did, just like Mt. Gox did, just like the other crypto bankruptcies did. Now banks can play that game as well. And you can bet your bottom dollar that FDIC is getting ready to accumulate as many people's Bitcoin in the bank and try and make sure that you don't hold it in self-custody. Now, this is going to create a wave of inbound investment into Bitcoin. And hopefully we can educate more people by you sharing, liking, subscribing, and we can educate people into making that transition into owning their own assets independent of the bank's fractional reserve proof of weapons Ponzi scheme. And even if they have some in their pension, at least doing it through a custody service and ideally hedging and going into self-custody as you start to plan your freedom strategy. Right. Okay. So we've had the SEC capitulation. We've had the FDIC capitulation. We've had the bank's capitulation. We've had India's capitulation, all the countries we covered last week. And now we had a speech from Trump's Crypto Czar, David Sachs. David Sachs created a beautiful buying strategy, which was taken advantage of by Eric Trump, who was making sure that before and after, creating a little bit of a pump and dump so that he can accumulate some cheap assets for World Liberty Financial and fool people into engaging in thinking that the price is going to pump. Then David Sachs came out with a nothing burger statement. And then that led to people being disappointed, a pump dump. And then Eric Trump saying, good chance to buy. And the people that understand that weren't just trading news, they accumulated some cheaper Bitcoins while everyone else was selling the top and buying the bottom. Please don't be a trader. investing is the game. The insiders are the ones that can manipulate the market. And as we move to a deregulated environment, in order to stimulate the US economy, David Sachs came out and he had his little speech. They're going to be focusing. So everyone was looking at, are they going to announce a Bitcoin strategic reserve? Because of Cynthia Lummis hyping up the meeting. And so that created an expectation. These things don't move that fast. They were announcing, look, I've been involved in regulations in this industry for 14 years, running Bank to the Future that has been involved in regulations from day one. These things take years. This is moving fast. They announced that they're going to have a 100-day strategy to get things moving. They said they're going to evaluate their Bitcoin strategic reserves. I think it's going to happen. And the Sovereign Wealth Fund is separate to its strategic stockpile. And they're going to have stablecoin regulations first. Why? Because stablecoin regulations demonetize fractional reserve banking. The Federal Reserve wants to have their input, and Trump wants to have a new tool to take on the Federal Reserve. And so they can get this one, knock it out of the park. And guess who's going to be issuing the first stablecoin? World Liberty Financial. If you want to follow the money, Trump will just make profits and make things happen. I now know how to analyze, and that helps me with my macro and geopolitical analysis as well that we're going to be covering today in part 2 and 3. So, of course, BlackRock, now that it has managed to get as many Americans to own Bitcoin in custody with them, is now looking to get Europeans into self-custody with them. And, this is a decent trade. You get to take some of your pension and protect your pension while governments blow it up with the state pensions. For example, Liz Truss in the UK, she was fired because she tried to implement some capitalism into the UK. That suddenly blew up. Well, in fact, it was a combination of capitalism and socialism. She wanted to subsidize cheaper energy in a cost of living crisis at the same time as reducing tax to go to a more free market. And then the pension market said, but we're levering up everyone's pension. We borrowed all this money against BlackRock, and it crashed the gilt market and created a run on the pension system. And the Bank of England needed to come in and bail it out. And the rulers at the Bank of England said, you're not allowed to play prime minister anymore. Get the hell out. And replaced it with their next conduit in order to achieve the deep state agenda of funding and guaranteeing all the war machine for the profits of the military industrial complex by getting the Bank of England to guarantee all of the debt that they wanted to send over to Ukraine. So it goes back into America in the European Central Bank's Fed First strategy of destroying the Europeans in order to get more profits and prop up the dollar, convert the euros into dollars, push up the euro dollar market, and allow the banks to issue more credit so that they can then buy dollars, and then those dollars are invested in blowing up more Ukrainians, and then they can use their briberies in order to make you think that you should be holding up a flag when unfortunately they're manipulating you into killing more Ukrainians because they expanded NATO to push this war, and the CIA executed a military coup in 2014 in order to ensure more violence for the profits of the military industrial complex. Anyway, BlackRock announced we're going to be launching a Bitcoin exchange traded product. It's called an ETP in Europe, and it means that people can have a market for purchasing Bitcoin within their pension through euros without having to go through the euro dollar market. And so BlackRock is hedging against America and will be hedging as it does when it accumulated 50% of Ukraine's land as the collateral, as it was issuing all of these predatory loans. And so at the same time as destroying Europe, it is now benefiting from all the war, benefiting from all the land in Ukraine. And now it's time to launch a Bitcoin Euro ETP product so it can suck up a bunch of the pension money without having to prop up the dollar as we move to an environment of American isolationism and BlackRock hedging into different regions. as we move to this geopolitical shifts as a result of the tariffs that we'll be covering in part 2. Well, anyway, we now have, it is applying with the regulators, and the ECB will do its lobby power and say, you can't have crypto, but you can have a Bitcoin exchange traded product. But we do have the MiCA regulations in Europe, which allows people to invest in self-custody. And as long as the European Central Bank doesn't get its evil way, there is still the ability for you to accumulate your Bitcoin with your euros and exit it into self-custody while you can. Game theory will mean that you have to do it because eventually they'll have to protect their ECB proof of weapons network using Bitcoin, and AI will disrupt them in the end, making sure as long as we can put AI on open source, thank you, DeepSeek China, that's going to pivot everyone to open source, and hopefully it will be hosted on a decentralized supercomputer like Bitcoin eventually, or whatever it's going to end up. And that will allow us to protect ourselves thanks to this. And then central banks, if AI takes over and they launch their CBDCs, hopefully AI will choose the rational decision of backing it by Bitcoin, so that they can have a geopolitical strategic advantage relative to the inflation and the wealth inequality that leads to civil wars, civil unrest, and eventually external new world orders coming in, raging war with those countries, and then BlackRock hedging their bets, and the deep state and globalists hedging their bets, and using Bitcoin in order to make that transition. But it doesn't matter. Remember, Bitcoin preserved proof of work. It didn't fall for the strategy going proof of stake, so it doesn't matter who owns it. And the more and more people own it in self-custody, the better. And the more and more people decide to run their nodes, there's hundreds of thousands of them, they can back up, and it doesn't matter who owns it in terms of actually protecting this network. So that's everything on this week in Bitcoin. Now, do me a favor. I'm going to preserve my voice by taking a quick water break. In part 2, we're going to be going through macro, tariffs, everything that you need to know this week, impact on Mexico, Canada, China, and the economic impacts, and what I believe the strategy is based upon my new understanding of how Trump works. He just utilizes profit and will just drive wherever the profit goes. And I'll give a bit of analysis on that before we go through part 3, geopolitics. Okay, so here's my favor to ask for you. Please do reshare, please do retweet, add a comment below if you're watching the recording. Help me get the algorithm up, and please help me get to 100,000 subscribers so I can get my blue check, and then the YouTube overlords can actually give me some traffic by analyzing the channel and recognizing that, Simon, that content that we were oppressing you from in the geopolitical section is now a fact, now that there is an agenda to reveal everything and all the atrocities that we'll be covering more in the geopolitical section. Okay, I'll take a bit of water, like, reshare, tweet, hit that button, help me get some more people in, and then we'll go right back into the macro section in part 2.